As Brooklyn tiddied up around her husband's grave one day, she stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. There, just beside his resting place, lay a peculiar hole. After mulling over its significance for a while, she resolved to take an audacious step. What followed left her utterly astonished. Brooklyn often went nearly a month without visiting her husband's grave, which wasn't uncommon for her. Being not particularly affluent, they prioritized work over other matters. Although he had requested to be buried upstate with his family at an old cemetery, making visits challenging, Brooklyn made the effort nonetheless, driven by her deep love for him. Fortunately, she had Mondays off from her job at the diner, allowing her to frequently take advantage of the opportunity. On one such Monday, she journeyed upstate to pay her respects at Wyatt's grave. The atmosphere was chilly and bleak as autumn approached. Upon arriving, she felt a pang of shame as she beheld Wyatt's neglected headstone. The grass had grown wild, mingling with unsightly weeds. Among the surrounding graves, Wyatt's appeared particularly forlorn, covered in grass and leaves shed by the looming tree above. Despite the daunting task of cleaning up the area, Brooklyn remained undeterred. She knew the bus schedule by heart and planned to catch the last bus home once her work was complete. So she set down her bag, took out her gardening tools, and went to work cleaning up the area. She first started by clearing away the leaves. While she was collecting the bunch by his headstone, she noticed the peculiar-looking hole. She went to take a closer look and found that it was quite deep. In fact, she was sure that it was probably as deep as the grave itself. It wasn't small either. The entrance to the hole was quite wide. The curiosity of what the hole might be quickly turned into a sense of dread. The hole was a bit too close to the headstone for her liking. In fact, she was worried that it might be going down a bit too near his coffin. She went to find the cemetery custodian and showed him what she was concerned about. He looked briefly and then brushed her off, saying it was probably nothing. He assured her that he took the best care of the graves and nothing could disturb the beloved people who had been buried. Brooklyn was hardly convinced by this, by the mere state of the cemetery itself. She struggled to believe that this man was taking the greatest care of everything. In addition to this, she simply couldn't shrug off the odd feeling she had. There was something about the whole situation that made her uncomfortable. So she decided to call her son and see what he thought. Straight off the bat, her son seemed to think she was crazy. He told her to stop faffing around the headstone, to do what she came for, and then leave. He even went so far as to say that his father would not have liked her to worry like she was about something as stupid as a hole in the ground. Insulted and quite hurt, Brooklyn sat for a while, staring at the hole. She knew her son was probably right about what her husband would think, but if he were in her shoes, she knew her husband would have checked to see what was going on. So she got up and decided to act on her gut feeling. She went to the custodian's tool shed and sneakily took a spade from the back. He was nowhere to be seen, not that it surprised her much. She then quickly went back to the grave and began to dig where the hole was. Being a small, frail woman, this was not an easy feat for her at all. She struggled to get the hard ground loose enough to pull it all up, so she started picking at the hole with the corner of the big spade, trying to get some kind of movement to the ground. It was at this moment that she was confronted by an elderly man behind her. He shouted at her, asking what on earth she was doing. A bit embarrassed and slightly scared about what the man might think, she took her time answering, trying to explain as sweetly as possible that she was investigating where the hole went. What happened next surprised her in a good way. Once the man heard what she was trying to do, he perked up and offered to help her. He jokingly shared that he had initially thought that she was up to something criminal, but investigating a suspicious hole seemed like a good idea in hindsight. His late wife was buried there, so he didn't want anything to happen to her. He was much stronger and more nimble than Brooklyn, so opening up the hole in the ground proved to be much easier. He threw the spade into the ground over and over, pulling up the earth as he went. Brooklyn stood behind them anxiously to see what lay beneath. At first, it was quite hard to see for sure what was going on with all the moving ground, but then the spade hit something hard with a big knock. Brooklyn could feel her stomach rise up in her throat. That didn't sound good at all. Did he just hit her husband's coffin? Obviously, the man was thinking the same thing because he suddenly recoiled from digging. He stood back, trying to see if he could see what he just hit. Sure enough, peeping out a lot more shallowly than it should have been, was a coffin. The hole had led straight to Wyatt's coffin, which seemed to have a hole gaping in the wooden side. Immediately, Brooklyn's mind went to the worst-case scenario. She was convinced that this was just like a story she had recently read about grave robbers who had desecrated the dead for some wooden nonsense. The black market was rife with interactions like these. Frightened of what she might see, she told the man to stop. She then called the police, quickly explaining what they had stumbled on. They arrived promptly and began investigating. They had to call in a bulldozer to bring the coffin up. Naturally, Brooklyn was feeling quite overwhelmed. When she put her husband in the ground, she didn't expect to bring him up again, definitely not a year later. When they brought the coffin up, the hole in the side of the coffin was easily noticeable, but there was something peculiar about the shape of it. When the police took a closer look at the edging, something startling became clear. Without saying much to Brooklyn, they called in a specialist to be sure. Once he got there, he was able to confirm their theory right away. Turns out, some sort of pesky rodent had been burrowing around Wyatt's grave and had actually gnawed his way through the coffin. This happened because of two things. One, the family had buried Wyatt in a very simple pine coffin because of a lack of funds. The second was much more sinister than that. The specialist deemed that the cemetery had been cutting corners in procedure with regard to how they buried the casket. The depth of the grave was meant to be much deeper with a better seal to help prevent this sort of desecration. When they told Brooklyn about what had happened to Wyatt's coffin and her husband's body, she was speechless and devastated. She felt something was terribly wrong and couldn't control her emotions, breaking down completely. It was distressing to think her husband had endured such a fate because of the careless cemetery staff. Thankfully, the man who helped her went with her to the police station, where she filed complaints about the mistreatment of her husband's remains during burial. She was relieved she had checked on his grave when she did, putting an end to the negligence. But Brooklyn was appalled that it had occurred at all. After the investigation, she decided to use the money from her lawsuit to give Wyatt a proper second burial. She wanted to ensure he was laid to rest properly, closer to home, where she could visit him more often. This situation illustrated the importance of choosing the right place and trusting one's instincts in the end. Can you think about how bad Brooklyn might have felt? What would you do if you saw the hole? Tell us in the comments. I hope you liked this video. Please give it a thumbs up and share it with your loved ones. Also, subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss any updates from our channel. Thank you.